I'm joined now by Sky News contributor, former Howard Government Multicultural Affairs Minister Gary Hardgrave, and the Senior Fellow at Menzies Research Centre, Nick Cater, who is still abroad. Now, Peter Dutton has warned John Pizzuto today, gents, not to let the Victorian Liberals morph into Labor light during an interview, a podcast interview with former 3AW broadcaster Neil Mitchell. Have a listen.
The Victorian Liberal Party should be 10 points ahead of what is a shocking government here in Victoria at the moment. I think there are structural issues. I think, as we've proven at a federal level, there's no sense being just a lighter version of Labor. I think you need to take policy differences. I think you need to show that you would take the state in a different but better direction.
My wonderful team in Sydney have updated me. Nick, you are home. I'll come to you in a moment. Gary, pretty sage advice. The Libs in Victoria have basically been in opposition for 30 years, but for one short term in power. Do you think they're going to listen?
Well, probably not, because you see the problem, Peter, is there's this dreadful snake that rolls its way through the Liberal Party right around the country, and it's called the left. They're woke, they're internationalists, they're into all this government subsidy for renewable projects, all this sort of stuff, and they're in the Liberal Party. And the head of the snake is New South Wales. So Peter Dutton, cutting off the head there, is basically sending a message, frankly, to all states, but particularly to Victoria and, frankly, also to Queensland, that if we see these sorts of shenanigans, these sort of policy, Labor-light policies coming through, if we don't actually have a clear agenda that you're going to set out and we understand your values, if you don't want to be Menzian Liberals, you're in the wrong party. That's basically the message Peter Dutton is sending out. And the trouble now is we have people who are absent the proper values, the Menzian values. They dress themselves up, Peter, as conservatives. In a centre-right party, that goes over well with the branch members, but they're actually woke lefties, and they've infiltrated the organisation right throughout Australia, with the exception of Western Australia and South Australia, where they're cleaning them out. Tasmania is getting there as well. But I got to say, the rest of the country has got big problems about these sorts of things in the organisation, running contrary to what everyday branch members want. And that's the problem. We've got to get rid of these woke lefties in Victoria and other places, and it's got to be done now. Peter Dutton is doing the right thing, and a lot of people are saying, hallelujah, he's standing up for Menzian Liberal values. Good on
you're not wrong. Yeah, you're not wrong. My phone has literally erupted in the last few days. Nick, you're now back. You've been around the New South Wales Libs a long time. This big call to take over the division by the federal executive. Give me your take on things.
It's a big call, Peter, you're right, because for really since its creation in 1944, one of the party's great strengths is that it's a federated party, that the individual states are basically joined together, but they all have control over what happens in their own state. And that works very well and has worked very well for all that time. But of course, it has weaknesses too, as we've seen. And I really think that right now, the biggest obstacle to Peter Dutton winning the next election is certainly not Anthony Albanese, who's clearly the weakest Prime Minister that I remember for a long, long time. It is really the factions in his own party whose shenanigans, whose antics, whose self-seeking behaviour has weakened the party structures, and now we end up to the point where the party structures are unable to control themselves, are unable to tie their own shoelaces in some cases. And this federal intervention was necessary, and I really hope it pulls the party together, brings some sense together and say the opposition is Labor. It is not the faction that you are not.
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
and
exactly.
It takes guts, and I think this says to Australians, this is the sort of leader you're going to get with Peter Dutton. Quite prepared to make some tough decisions, even amongst his own. Let's go to the Blaney gold mine. I mentioned at the top of the show, there's 10 or so applications on Tanya Plibersek's desk to intervene, to use heritage laws, Aboriginal heritage laws, to shut down development. A big one is out there at the moment in South Australia. The Blaney gold mine, she's cancelled that. She's under pressure, though. Have a listen.
Minister Plibersek has a lot of answers to give for the questions that are being asked by this community, who are beside themselves at the fact that this opportunity has now been lost.
We will approve this mine as soon as we're elected because all the approvals have been granted.
Now, Gary, all credit to those MPs there, Littleproud and Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, turning up, meeting with locals, getting the intel on the ground. That's what you want to see from politicians. And David Littleproud making the point, you elect us, we'll approve the mine.
Yeah, a good point to make. But, you know, Peter, I'll put my hand up and say to you that I voted for the Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act back in the early 2000s. It was introduced to the Parliament as a way of making sure we met certain UN protocols. What it's been done has been weaponised by state governments all around the country, and this has slowed everything down. You can't get approvals for anything anywhere unless it's some sort of renewable energy project. Now, Tanya Plibersek is really vying for the honour of being the worst minister, which is really quite a title, but she is under pressure from the Greens. The Greens will fairly likely win her seat of Sydney at the next election. But what she's doing is killing off projects everywhere. In southeast Queensland, Toondah Harbour in the Redlands area, what that's done is completely wiped out about $11 billion worth of forward estimated infrastructure and further investment in the area. She's killing off this gold mine. She's got all these other things that she's trying to do, all off the back of what? Keeping the extreme green international socialist left happy. I mean, there's so many adjectives you can add to it, but Plibersek has signed on to it. And worse still, Peter, and this is the point, Anthony Albanese has no courage, no convictions and no values. And he is just simply allowing these ministers, her and Bowen and all these other people, to get away with all of this. He's not a Prime Minister. He's not even a Prime Minister's bootlace.
You make the point that if it's a renewables project and gets the green light, everything gets swept away. I spoke to Katrina Roundtree last night. She made that point because it's the projects that make us money we're shutting down, but the projects that cost us money, that cause us grief, they're green lighting. Have a listen.
There is also an Aboriginal cultural heritage sensitive area on this very farm. It's a little bit of a tongue twister to get out, but I hope that you can understand why the state government has already placed protections on this, and they are now being asked, step in, wipe it clean and let this be pushed through.
Now, Nick, just as a quick update, she's managed to get an extension on that sham consultation process. It was meant to close on Friday. It will now run till Saturday, the 28th of September. There's the details, engage.vic.gov.au. Get onto that website. Speak your mind, please, Victorians. But this is the problem, and it's going to get worse, Nick, because we know the Climate Energy Council wants us to go even harder on these renewables to meet Bowen's targets by 2030.
It's the two-tier approval process that's really annoying people, Peter. You've got this, one rule if it's a gold mine or if it's a coal mine that Clyde Palmer wants to open up. Completely different rules if you want to stick turbines in native tropical forests in far north Queensland, which, you know, the minister approved quite recently in the Upper Burdekin district. Apple were part of that deal. They were going to buy the electricity. They pulled out because they could see the damage to koala habitat and other things that were going to be caused by this. But no, the minister approves it. Here's a minister that has, you know, great compassion for koalas, and she set up special programs to look after koalas. But she has approved wind turbine developments in Queensland that have taken out thousands of hectares of koala habitat.
Shame.
It's just absolutely the two standards that she applies are quite different.
Chris Bowen too today announced 6 new big massive battery farms on their way. Every battery is the size of a shipping container, and there are literally going to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. So engage.vic.gov.au. Push back Australia. All right, gents, see you both next week. Great to have you home, Nick.